The riders stopped 30 feet from the camp, 8 of them, dust-streaked hats, horses breathing heavy, spurs still jingling, but none moved forward. Their leader, a tall man with a shotgun resting across his saddle horn, tilted his head like he was listening for something, but there was no sound, no shout, no threat, no rifle cocked in warning. Just a low, eerie rattle from somewhere near the ground and the smell of something that didn't belong in sagebrush country. One of the horses stamped nervously. Another tossed its head. The men shifted in their saddles but didn't speak. Ahead, a single figure sat crouched beside the fire, motionless, not even looking up. They could see the tent behind him, a circle of sharpened stakes, some coiled wire, a few old tin cans half buried in sand. The man didn't stand, didn't speak, didn't flinch. And after a long, heavy pause, the riders turned their horses and vanished back the way they came, as if something had whispered to them that it wasn't worth the cost. His name was Eli Carver, and whatever he'd built in that sand, it worked. A few years earlier, Eli had been another nameless cowboy riding fence lines and sleeping under open skies. A man who'd survived the border wars, 2 winters with nothing but hardtack and whiskey, and the kind of betrayal that made a man look sideways at everyone for the rest of his life. He wasn't the fastest draw, but he didn't miss when it counted. He wasn't the loudest talker, but when he said something, it stuck. Folks who met him didn't remember his voice, only his eyes steady, tired, and constantly scanning the edges of things. By the time he was 35, Eli had buried more friends than he'd made, slept in more abandoned shacks than saloons, and developed one conviction that never left him. Safety was something you built, not something you prayed for. So when he stopped riding, when he chose a clearing deep between the pines, 3 days' ride from the nearest township, no one questioned it. They just assumed he was done chasing cattle or running messages for hire. But what he started building wasn't a homestead. It wasn't a trapper's camp, and it sure as hell wasn't a friendly stop for passing riders. It started with a circle, a perfect, hand-measured ring in the sand. Then came the coiled wire. Then the stakes, some cut from ash, others sharpened iron scavenged from old rail scrap. And then came the cans. Rusted, blackened, filled with things nobody could quite explain. People said he'd gone crazy, that the war had taken his mind. But he kept building, kept refining. No walls, no locks, no signs. Just a perimeter, a line. And whatever lay inside it, wolves didn't cross. Outlaws didn't linger. Even the wind seemed to shift when it reached that ring. They laughed at him until they saw it. Then they started riding the long way around. Eli Carver hadn't always been alone, but people had a way of not lasting around him. Some left because of the quiet, the way he could go days without saying more than a grunt. Others left because of the silence in his eyes, the kind that didn't come from shyness or coldness, but from seeing things that no man should have survived. The last man who tried to partner with him, a wiry drifter named Clay, who fancied himself clever, asked Eli once why he walked the perimeter every night with a lantern and a pocketful of crushed mint. Eli just said, "Because peace is the lie you tell yourself right before the storm." Clay didn't stay long after that. The war had carved its mark deep into Eli's bones. Not the Civil War that had passed him by when he was too young to carry a rifle, but the border fights that came after. The kind with no uniforms. Just men with names like Captain or Judge who led others into brushfire nightmares for silver, revenge, or nothing at all. Eli had ridden with one such crew for 2 seasons, guarding supply wagons, mapping routes, and burying the dead when they ran out of medicine. That was where he learned that wolves weren't always 4-legged, and that men who smiled easy could slit your throat faster than a bear ever could. By the time the skirmishes died down, Eli had lost the taste for towns. He didn't hate people. He just didn't trust them to think more than a day ahead. Most folks built lives like they weren't ever going to fall apart. They bought thin canvas for tents, counted on dry weather, left their backs to open woods. He'd seen too many graves marked with names carved into tin cups and belt buckles. Mistakes, mostly. Trust, mostly. So when he drifted west and found the clearing flat, wide, shaded from the worst sun but dry enough to stay above flood, he stopped. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was defendable. He didn't ride into town and buy lumber. He didn't stake a claim or run a fence line. He pitched a single canvas tent, dug a trench for runoff, walked the perimeter. Not once, not twice, but for 5 days straight. Measured it with rawhide, pounded sticks to mark high wind exposure, left meat out at night just to watch what came sniffing. And when he was sure, the clearing sat between two natural roots, but off both he sat down and started sketching in the sand. He wasn't building shelter, he was building refusal. Not just against weather or hunger, but against interruption, against intrusion. He didn't want to hide from the world. He just wanted a place where the world had to knock first and know it might not survive crossing the threshold. That was the idea. That was the start. And that's when the invention began. It started with a perfect circle, 12 paces across, traced slow in the sand with a crooked stick Eli had trimmed to match his stride. Not because he believed in symbols or sacred geometry, he didn't care much for mystics or preachers, but he did believe in control. And the circle gave him something fixed, something measurable. A line between known and unknown. Between inside and out. He reinforced it first with twine, looping a perimeter so he could walk it blind. Then came the pegs thin, sharpened, and spaced by instinct more than calculation. No man told him where to put them. He just walked and felt. The twine marked the edge of a place that wasn't safe for anyone but him. Over time, that idea hardened into something else. Something physical. He began collecting metal barbed wire, discarded fencing, snapped tools left behind by cattlemen too tired to carry junk. A broken wheel rim. Cans, dozens of them, rusted and punched, their labels long washed away by rain. He'd trade in town, occasionally jerky for scrap, tobacco for a strip of twisted iron. Some folks humored him. Others whispered, "Old Eli's building a wind trap," they'd joke, or maybe a metal nest to sleep in. He didn't argue. He didn't need them to understand. Each coil of wire was cleaned, straightened, then looped back into spirals and buried shallow beneath the sand, just beneath the surface where bare feet or animal paws might step. The metal wasn't the trap, not yet. The trap was what it would trigger. He tied rattlesnake tails to some wires, greased hinges to others, so that even the lightest contact would sing through the air with a sound that made your gut go cold. It wasn't noise for volume, it was noise for memory. The kind of sound you didn't want to hear twice. By midsummer, the ring had taken shape, not just a defensive line, but a sensory threshold. The spike traps were shaped like arrowheads, sharpened on sandstone, dipped in lard, then rolled in soot and pine resin. Eli drove them into the ground at irregular intervals, not close enough to block passage, but close enough to force a choice. Step here or step there, either way, wrong. And then came the smell. He learned from. The land watched how wolves avoided fresh bear scat, how coyotes reacted to smoke-soaked pelts, how deer froze when the wind carried blood. So he built his own scent signature. Rendered fat from a raccoon, mixed it with ashes and salt, then smeared it on the spikes and wire. It wasn't meant to repel, it was meant to confuse. No creature, man or beast, would smell that and feel right. People passing by started riding faster. Horses grew skittish near his camp. Coyotes stopped howling near his tent. And yet, there wasn't a wall. There wasn't a gate. There was just a circle. The circle became a line. The line became a warning. And that warning would save lives his own first, and then others. The first time it failed, it wasn't wolves or outlaws. It was a girl no older than 16 looking for her family's lost mule. She wandered into Eli's camp just after dawn, barefoot, holding a hemp rope, and shivering in a patched cotton dress. She had crossed the line, without triggering a single rattle. No spike, no scent, nothing. She stepped through as easy as walking across a creek bed, blinking at Eli like she didn't know whether to be scared or ask for breakfast. Eli didn't say a word, just stared at the ground where she'd passed. Then, without touching his rifle, he pointed to the trail she'd come from and said, "It ain't safe that way." She nodded and left. He never saw her again. But that morning broke something in him. Not panic, not fear, but doubt. He dismantled the circle and rebuilt it that afternoon. For the next 4 weeks he tested everything. Dug pressure plates under the sand with flattened tin springs that snapped loud when stepped on too loud. They triggered wind, weightless birds, even his own boot once, nearly giving him a heart attack. He replaced them with hollow reeds packed with crushed gravel, quieter but inconsistent. Sometimes they made no sound, sometimes they echoed like thunder. He tried. Mirrors, next bits of polished metal strung between posts at odd angles to reflect movement from certain approaches. The theory was sound, the execution was chaos. At twilight, the reflections became ghosts, shadows multiplying into threats that weren't there. He couldn't sleep. Started dreaming of fires that weren't burning, heard things. He threw them into the creek. Then he moved to scent layering. He soaked strips of deer hide in sulfur water, burned it slow, then smeared the ash along his fire pit. The smell hung in the air like rot, but wolves still came. Not many, but enough to leave prints. One left teeth marks on a grease tin. That same night, Eli stayed awake with his rifle across his knees. Not because he needed to, but because he didn't trust the circle anymore. The next morning, he found the flaw, the wind. The scent was drifting wrong. His traps were laid to the south, but the wind had turned west. His entire defense had been built on one assumption, that the world stayed still. It didn't. So he moved everything. Not once, not twice, 7 times over the next 3 days. He adjusted for airflow, for sunrise angles, for sound bounce off the nearby pines. He camped in total silence, listening to how a whisper moved across dry dirt at night. Every mistake taught him something. Every near miss was a refinement. And slowly, the failures became fewer. The perimeter grew smarter. He wasn't building a wall, he was building an answer to chaos. And chaos had rules, you just had to suffer enough to learn them. By early autumn, Eli had stopped calling it a trap. Not out loud, he rarely spoke, but in his mind, the word no longer fit. Traps were meant to catch. What he'd built wasn't trying to catch anything, it was trying to make everything turn around before it got close. Like a mirror held up to fear. He called it the second skin. The idea had come to him while watching a badger circle a coyote den one dusk. The coyote never came out, never barked. But the badger circled once, twice, then stopped, sniffed the air, and backed away. Something had warned it off. Not threat, not noise, just a presence. Eli decided to build that presence. He gathered bear grease from a taxidermist 2 towns over, traded a pair of spurs and a month's worth of jerky for a tin full of the stuff. Mixed it with ash, dried wild mint, and crushed bone char. The result was a smell that didn't just reek it haunted. It didn't smell like death. It smelled like something that had killed death and walked away still hungry. He smeared it along the spikes first, then the sand, then inside the rusted cans that lined the perimeter like empty mouths. It stuck in the air long after wind passed through. By the second night, rabbits no longer came near. Deer detoured by 50 yards. And the coyotes, they stopped howling altogether. But scent wasn't enough. The wolves, he knew, might push through fear if desperation was louder. So, he turned to sound. That was when the cans came alive. He strung them with thin wire gut string from a broken fiddle and metal twine scavenged from a trapper's cache. Each was placed carefully, not too close to trigger each other, but close enough that the vibration would carry. He lined the bottom of some with dry beans, others with bone chips or flat stones. When a wire was disturbed, even slightly, the can didn't rattle, it whispered, a strange skittering sound that didn't belong in nature, not loud enough to wake a man, but enough to stop a beast in its tracks. He tested it in the dark, blindfolded, barefoot, walked the edge, and found every sound pocket, every scent swirl, moved things inches at a time. He wasn't building a fence anymore, he was building suggestion. By the end of the week, you couldn't see it. Not really. From 20 feet away, it just looked like scattered junk. But you could feel it. The air inside the circle was calm, dry, heavy, almost. The air. Outside? Tense, ready to run. It wasn't a wall. It wasn't even a defense. It was a question. Are you sure you want to come closer? And everything that approached had to answer it, long before Eli ever reached for his rifle. The first real test came on a windless night in late October. Cold had settled low into the valley, sinking into the ground like breath held too long. No moon, no fire. just the sharp smell of pine bark and frost. Eli sat with his back against a tree, inside the circle, rifle across his lap. He hadn't lit the fire on purpose, he wanted to feel them before they saw him. He'd seen the tracks that morning, 3 wolves, big ones, not strays, not coyotes, wolves. Their prints ran wide around his camp, like they'd known something was there before their paws ever touched the dirt. He'd checked every wire, every spike, every scent marker. Nothing disturbed, nothing touched. But something was coming. He could feel it like a knot in his ribs. They arrived, just before midnight. Silent. The first one broke the tree line without a sound, shoulders low, eyes glowing faint in the starlight. It moved sideways at first, testing the wind. Eli didn't move. He just watched, heart steady, breath shallow. Another wolf appeared behind the first, this one, larger, leaner, older. Then a third, trailing behind, less cautious. They approached together, in a broken crescent, toward the edge of the circle. That's when it started. The older wolf stepped near the first coil of buried wire. Not on it, near it. The motion vibrated through the line, catching one of the hollow cans nestled under a shale rock. It didn't clatter. It hissed. A dry, stuttering sound, almost like breath drawn in through teeth. The wolf froze, head low, ears twitching. The second one moved closer, sniffing at the sand. It caught the scent, the mix of bear grease, ash, mint, and bone, and recoiled so quickly it left a swipe in the dirt. The third tried a different angle, skirting left, aiming for the side where the fence had once had a gap. But Eli had filled that 2 nights ago with pine needles soaked in old blood and tar. The wolf paused there, nose in the air, then backed off slowly. They circled once, just once. Not a sound came from Eli. He didn't lift the rifle, didn't speak. He was no longer a man to them. He was something else now. A scent, a presence. A question in the dark they didn't want to answer. Then, without warning, the largest wolf turned, walked away. The others followed. No growls, no rush. Just silence, then absence. Eli sat there until morning. Didn't light the fire, didn't move. When the sun came, he found their prints again. They'd come close within 10 feet of the line. But none had crossed it. No blood spilled, no warning fired. And yet, the invention held. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper. Instinct, confusion, doubt. Whatever he'd built had spoken their language and told them this place didn't belong to prey. It happened less than a week after the wolves turned back. Eli had just finished re-chinking one of the scent cans with a fresh mix of grease and crushed bark when he heard the horses, distant at first, but closing fast, 4 riders, maybe 5. Too many for travelers, too quiet for ranch hands. He didn't panic, he didn't run. Instead, he stood in the center of his ring and lit the fire. The flames caught slow, dry pine cones, old juniper kindling, nothing too loud. He knelt beside it, fed it small pieces like feeding a hungry dog, and waited. Didn't reach for the rifle. Didn't glance toward the tree line. He knew they'd seen the smoke already. That's why they were coming. The riders broke through the trees with the sun low behind them, casting their shadows long and sharp across the clearing. 5 men, dust-covered, armed, each with that loose, watchful posture you only ever see in men who've done worse things than they care to admit. The one in front had a green bandana tied around his neck, not for dust, but for signaling. Probably the leader. His horse stopped short at the edge of the clearing, hooves stamping once, then again. They were close now, 15 yards, just outside the circle. Eli didn't move. He sat cross-legged by the fire, slicing thin strips of jerky into a tin cup. He didn't look up, didn't have to. He could feel their eyes scanning everything, the coils of wire barely visible in the dirt, the oddly placed cans, the twisted stakes half buried near the tent. It didn't look like a fort. It looked like a puzzle, and none of them could find the first piece. The leader shifted in his saddle. "You alone out here?" Eli didn't answer. "You deaf, old man?" Still no answer. One of the younger riders started to dismount, hand on his revolver, eyes squinting. But before his boot touched the ground, something shifted not in the camp, but in the air. The wind changed. A soft gust carried the full weight of the scent line right toward them. The horses reacted first. One whinnied and backed up, Another twisted its head and tried to turn. The third refused to move at all, frozen stiff with ears pinned back. The men swore, calmed their animals, tried to hide their unease, but Eli saw it, their hands tensing, their eyes darting. Their weight shifting in the saddle not because they were ready to draw, but because they were ready to leave. The leader leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "What is this?" Eli finally looked up, not with threat, not with anger, but with silence sharpened by certainty. He didn't say a word, just stared through the fire like the smoke itself was enough to keep them out. And that's when they made the decision, without a signal, without a shot. One by one, they turned their horses around and rode off, the leader last to leave, glancing back just once with a look not of defeat, but of confusion. He didn't know what he'd just seen. But whatever it was, he didn't want to challenge it. It didn't take long for stories to spread. The Outlaws didn't speak of Eli's name, might not have known it. But word filtered down through ranch hands, mail riders, saloon whispers, about a campsite out in the pines, east of the ridge, where 5 men turned back without a shot, where the air itself made horses shy and wolves wouldn't pass. Some started calling it cursed. Others called it something stranger, the ghost fence. Nobody could say exactly what it was. Folks described it like a line in the dirt that talked not with words, but with warning. They said you could feel it in your gut before you even saw it, that it made you want to leave your horse hitched a little farther out, speak a little softer, and walk a little slower. Eli never named it, never explained it, never invited visitors, but the land did the talking for him. A drifter passing through one afternoon claimed he felt watched the moment he stepped near the clearing. Said it was like walking into a cathedral without knowing the words. He turned around and left without knocking. Another man, a bounty hunter from New Mexico, made it as far as the fire pit before hearing a sound he couldn't place, like wind through hollow bones. He rode off without unsaddling, even the animals adjusted. Packs of coyotes rerouted entirely around the perimeter. A mountain lion was spotted stalking game along the nearby ridgeline, but never once entered the clearing. Its prints stopped clean at the edge. Snow melted unevenly there, leaving a ring like scorched earth. No plants sprouted near the coils. Birds avoided the branches overhead. It was as if the land itself had accepted Eli's design and started obeying it. Other cowboys tried copying it. One hammered iron stakes around his camp in a rough circle. Another strung up cans filled with rocks and bones. But none of them got it right, because it wasn't just the materials. It was the layering, the silence, the knowledge of scent drift and predator instincts, and where fear lived before it had a name. Eli never corrected them. He kept refining. Some nights he'd wake before dawn just to listen. Not for movement, but for stillness. For that quiet pressure in the chest that meant the air was holding its breath. He moved a single stake, 6 inches once. Rearranged 3 cans the next night. Added a scent compound made from snake musk and pine vinegar. Always adjusting, always listening, and slowly the ghost fence became more than defense. It became a boundary between 2 kinds of men, those who pressed forward, no matter what, and those wise enough to stop. No one ever crossed it twice, not because Eli would shoot them, but because they didn't want to feel what they felt when they stood near it like something was staring back. He showed up near dusk, stumbling through the trees with a busted boot and a look in his eyes that didn't match his age. 16, maybe 17, dust in his teeth, a swollen lip. The kind of limp that doesn't come from falling, the kind that comes from being thrown off something moving too fast. Eli heard him before he saw him, not footsteps breathing. Ragged, anxious, close to breaking. By the time the boy reached the edge of the circle, he was too tired to be afraid. He didn't pause at the line like the others, didn't sniff the air or look for wires. He just walked right through, slow, staggering, and collapsed by the fire pit, knees first, then hands, then flat. Eli didn't move for a while, just watched. The boy didn't cry, didn't speak, only stared at the flames like they were something sacred. Eli finally knelt beside him, passed him a tin cup filled with warm water and a pinch of salt. They sat in silence for half an hour. When the boy finally spoke, his voice cracked like an old hinge. "They were chasing me." He didn't say who, didn't need to. Eli just nodded. The boy looked around, not at the fire or the tent, but at the circle, at the spikes half hidden in sand, at the wire like dead snakes coiled in the dirt. "What is this?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "Why didn't they follow?" Eli didn't answer right away. He added a split log to the fire, poked at the embers until the sparks rose into the cold dusk like fireflies. Then he said, "It's not a wall." The boy furrowed his brow. "But they didn't cross it." Eli stirred the coals again. "It's a question," he said. "You step near it, and it asks you if you're sure. If you ain't, you walk away." The boy blinked. "What kind of question?" Eli looked past the fire, the kind only fear knows how to answer. The boy stayed for 2 days. Didn't ask for food, but Eli fed him anyway: beans, dried fruit, boiled root mash. The kind of meals you prepare when you expect the cold to stay longer than men do. On the second morning, the boy stood at the edge of the ring, looking out into the woods. "I don't know where I'm going," he said. Eli replied, "That's fine, so long as you know what you're walking away from." The boy left without looking back. Eli watched the tree line long after he was gone. He'd never asked the boy's name, never told him his own. But something about that visit stayed with him, a reminder that some people cross the line because they're running, not because they're ready. And for those few, the ghost fence wasn't a warning. It was sanctuary disguised as something dangerous. No one saw him leave. There wasn't a note, no trail, no rumors in town. One day, a trapper passing through said he'd stopped by the clearing and found the fire cold, the tent gone, the stones scattered, no boots by the pit, no rifle leaning against the stump. Just a perfect circle in the sand where the dirt still held the memory of something once carefully protected. The ghost fence was gone. No wire, no scent, no cans, nothing. But people still didn't walk through it. Over the months, others came, some out of curiosity, some chasing legends, a few searching for the man himself, hoping for answers to questions they'd never asked. They found no sign of him, but they all said the same thing. The place still felt wrong, still felt heavy, as if the ground remembered what it had been and what it had dared to repel. One writer said he dismounted and tried stepping over the line but stopped mid-stride, couldn't explain why, couldn't finish the step, just turned and left. The boy returned once, older now, broader in the shoulders, a better horse under him. He didn't say much, just tied his reins to a low branch and stood in the clearing a while. Walked the circle, sat by the fire pit, whispered something no one heard. Then he too was gone. The years passed. The trees grew taller, grass crept back into the sand, the shape of the circle blurred, but never quite vanished. Even storms couldn't erase it fully. Somehow, the land remembered. People began calling it Eli's Ring, not as a warning anymore, but as a story. A tale told by firelight to young cowhands who needed to understand what survival looked like before it was easy. About the man who built something that didn't just keep danger out, it made danger doubt itself. Some said he died. Others said he walked south, where the wind was warmer and the wolves smaller. A few claimed he rode with a caravan of Navajo traders, teaching children how to smell the air before making camp. But no one ever found him, because he wasn't meant to be found. He had drawn a line not just in sand, but in time, between a world that acted first and thought later and the quiet wisdom of a man who knew the cost of not preparing. He hadn't built a fence. He hadn't built a trap. He had built hesitation and let it do the rest. And when he was finished, he erased it himself. Because the only thing harder than being ready for danger is knowing when you're safe enough to stop. The land closed in behind him, like a book shutting on the last word. But that question still hangs in the clearing like smoke that never quite lifts. Are you sure you want to come closer?